There's a traitor on this plane. The NATO alert blasted through the cabin, sending passengers into chaos. Aviation security rushed in, searching every row. The girl in seat 14A, dark hair, thin frame, silent since boarding, was pulled to her feet when they found an old military ID in her bag. Before hundreds of suspicious eyes, she slowly grabbed the emergency microphone, her voice cold as steel. Valkyrie 1 reporting. You called me back. Now face the truth. At the control tower, F-22 pilots froze in shock. That was the call sign of the legendary commander they thought was lost forever. Elena Volkova, 29 years old, long black hair, gray eyes, Russian by birth, but living in Germany for the past 7 years. She sat in seat 14A on a commercial flight from Frankfurt to New York, tucked against the window in the economy section. Her outfit was unremarkable. Gray jacket, faded jeans, worn sneakers. She looked like any ordinary young woman traveling alone, nobody worth noticing. Throughout the entire flight, Elena barely spoke a word. She sat quietly, occasionally flipping through a small notebook, sometimes gazing at a scratched metal card before quickly tucking it back into her pocket. The passengers around her whispered among themselves, "She's so strange. Hasn't said anything to anyone." An American businessman sitting across the aisle smirked. Probably some kind of weirdo. People like that never amount to anything in life. Elena just smiled faintly, then leaned down to help a small boy tie his shoelaces, gentle as if she hadn't heard the insult at all. Laura, a German mother traveling with her son, noticed how Elena was always ready to help but never spoke much. She thought to herself, "She's quiet, but there's something very disciplined about every movement she makes." When a flight attendant accidentally dropped a tray of drinks, Elena silently bent down to help clean up, wiping every drop of water carefully before returning to her seat without a word. An elderly passenger later recalled, "I looked into her eyes. They were calm to a degree that didn't seem normal for an ordinary person." Elena had been this way for years. After the incident that destroyed her career, she'd learned that silence was safer than speaking. That invisibility was better than being seen. She'd once commanded squadrons of fighter jets, making split-second decisions that saved lives. But now she was just another face in the crowd, another passenger nobody remembered. The metal card in her pocket was all that remained of that life. Call sign Valkyrie 1. Commander of the 77th Tactical Air Squadron, officially declared dead 7 years ago. But she wasn't dead. She'd been erased, framed for leaking classified intelligence, court-martialed in secret, her records buried so deep that even her former squadmates believed she'd died in a training accident. She'd tried to fight it at first, tried to prove her innocence. But when you're fighting the entire system, when the people who framed you have more power than you ever did, silence becomes survival. So she disappeared, changed her name, moved to Germany, found work as a translator, lived quietly, never drawing attention. But she kept the card, the one piece of evidence that she'd once been someone, that she'd once mattered. On this flight, she was traveling to New York for a translation job. Nothing special, just another day in her invisible life. She didn't know that in less than 2 hours, that silence would be shattered forever. The businessman continued his phone call loudly, boasting about a deal. "These military types, they're all washed up, can't adapt to the real world." Elena glanced at him briefly, then returned to her notebook. Laura's son, the little boy whose shoe Elena had tied, tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mama, I like that lady. She's nice." "Don't "Don't bother her, sweetheart," Laura whispered. But she watched Elena curiously. There was something about the way Elena held herself. Perfect posture, economical movements, eyes that constantly scanned the cabin, noting exits, counting passengers, assessing threats that probably didn't exist. Old habits die hard. "Attention, passengers. This is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some unusual radio interference, but everything is under control. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Elena's head snapped up. Her eyes narrowed. Radio interference over the Atlantic wasn't normal. She pulled out the metal card, running her thumb over the worn engraving. Something was wrong. The scratched metal card with Valkyrie 1 engraved. Halfway across the Atlantic Ocean, the aircraft's radar detected something unusual. An unidentified signal approaching fast from the north. Air traffic control immediately contacted the flight. "Commercial Flight 723, be advised. NATO has issued a security alert for your aircraft. There are indications of a possible armed infiltrator on board. Prepare for security inspection." The cabin erupted in panic. Passengers screamed. Children cried. People grabbed their phones. The captain's voice came over the intercom, strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're required to conduct a security check. Please remain calm and cooperate fully." 3 aviation security officers, who'd been traveling undercover on the flight, revealed themselves and began moving through the cabin with handheld scanners. The loudspeaker crackled again. "There is a potential security threat on this flight. Please cooperate to ensure everyone's safety." Passengers turned on each other immediately. "It's that Arab man in row 8, someone shouted. "No, it's the Russian woman," another voice called out. The security team methodically checked each row, scanning bags, checking IDs against watch lists. When they reached row 14, they stopped at Elena's seat. She sat perfectly still, hands visible on the armrests, eyes forward. "Ma'am, we need to check your belongings." Elena nodded slightly, not resisting. One officer pulled her small backpack from under the seat. He unzipped it carefully, finding only a change of clothes, a notebook, and a wallet. Then his hand closed around something else. A metal card, heavy, military grade. He pulled it out, and his eyes widened. The card was scratched and worn, but the engraving was clear. "Valkyrie 1, 77th Tactical Air Squadron." "Sir, we've got something," he called to his supervisor. The senior security officer examined the card, then checked a device in his hand. His face went pale. "NATO, this is security team on Flight 723. We have positive identification of Valkyrie 1. Repeat, Valkyrie 1 is on board." The cabin exploded in panic. "She's the traitor," the American businessman shouted, standing up. "I knew something was wrong with her." "Get her off the plane," someone else screamed. A German man spat out, "I could tell from the beginning." She was too quiet, too suspicious. The security officers grabbed Elena by the arms, pulling her to her feet. Over the radio, NATO command's voice cut through. "All units, Valkyrie 1 is classified as a high-value defector. Possible intelligence compromise. Proceed with extreme caution." Elena stood calmly between the officers, her expression unchanged. Then she did something that made everyone freeze. She reached slowly for the emergency communication microphone hanging near the bulkhead, moving deliberately so no one would think she was reaching for a weapon. The security officers tensed, but didn't stop her. Elena brought the microphone to her lips. When she spoke, her voice was completely different from the quiet woman who'd been helping tie shoelaces. It was cold, precise, commanding. "Valkyrie 1 reporting. You called me back. Now face the truth. The entire cabin went silent except for the metallic hum of the engines. In the cockpit, the pilot's hands froze on the controls. "Did she just say Valkyrie 1?" the co-pilot whispered. Above them, circling at 30,000 feet, 2 F-22 Raptors had been scrambled to intercept. The lead pilot was reviewing the threat assessment when he heard Elena's voice over the emergency frequency. His hands started shaking. "Ghost 2, did you hear that?" he transmitted to his wingman. "Affirmative, Ghost 1. That voice. It can't be." The lead pilot's voice cracked. "That's our commander. That's the voice from Syria, from Baghdad, from every mission we flew 7 years ago." "But she's dead." The official report said. "I don't care what the report said. That's her." Back on the commercial flight, passengers were yelling at Elena, calling her traitor, terrorist, spy. Elena stood perfectly still, the microphone still in her hand, waiting. Then another voice came over the frequency, transmitted from one of the F-22s circling above. "Valkyrie 1, this is Ghost 1. Authenticate with code Sierra Bravo 7. Without hesitation, Elena responded. "Ghost 1, authentication Sierra Bravo 7. Response code Thunderhawk Midnight. Squadron motto, no one fights alone." The radio went silent for 3 full seconds. Then the F-22 pilot's voice came back, shaking with emotion. "Copy that, Valkyrie. Authentication confirmed. Ma'am, they told us you died in a training accident 7 years ago. Where have you been?" Elena's jaw tightened. "I didn't die. They erased me." Elena's voice, authentication, and the F-22 pilot's recognition. The news spread instantly through the military communication network. The voice that had just authenticated was Valkyrie 1, the female commander who'd led some of the most successful tactical air operations in Syria and Iraq, officially declared dead 7 years ago. The lead F-22 pilot's voice trembled over the radio. "Valkyrie 1, is it really you? We mourned you. We named our squadron after you." Elena's response was measured. "I'm not dead. They just deleted me from the records." Then came the first twist. Elena explained in short clipped sentences over the emergency frequency. 7 years ago, after a successful mission retrieving high-value intelligence, classified data was leaked to foreign powers. Someone needed to take the blame. She was the perfect scapegoat. A woman in a male-dominated field who'd risen too fast, made too many enemies among the old guard. They court-martialed her in secret, accused her of being the leak, stripped her of everything, and declared her dead to close the case. She'd tried to fight it. But when you're fighting generals and politicians, one lieutenant commander doesn't stand a chance. So she disappeared. Let them think she'd given up. Let them think she'd broken. But she'd kept one thing. The metal ID card with her call sign. The only proof she'd existed. "They took everything," Elena said into the microphone, her voice still controlled but with an edge of steel underneath. "My career. My name. My life. But they couldn't take what I knew. They couldn't erase what I was." The second twist came seconds later. The unidentified signal that had triggered the NATO alert wasn't Elena. It was a small Cessna aircraft that had lost communication and was now flying erratically, on a collision course with the commercial flight. Elena had noticed it on the cabin's flight information display before anyone else. The unusual radar pattern, the wrong altitude, the converging trajectory. "This flight is in immediate danger," Elena announced. "There's an aircraft with no transponder on collision course, estimated impact in 4 minutes. The captain's voice came over the intercom, panicked. "We don't have visual. We can't confirm." "I can confirm," Elena cut him off. "I've been reading tactical radar for 15 years. Trust me or don't, but in 3 minutes and 30 seconds, this plane will be debris." The passengers who'd been shouting insults minutes ago went silent, confused. The American businessman who'd called her a weirdo turned pale. "Is she serious?" Elena ignored everyone and spoke directly to the captain over the intercom. "Captain, you need to make an immediate emergency descent, 15 degrees, bearing 270. Then climb hard to avoid wake turbulence." "I can't just—" "Do it now!" Elena's command voice shattered through the cabin like a whip crack. Every military person on the flight instantly recognized it. The voice of someone who'd made life-or-death decisions under fire. The captain hesitated for only 1 second, then pushed the controls forward. The plane dropped suddenly. Passengers screamed. Luggage fell from overhead bins. Elena braced herself against the seat, still holding the microphone, her eyes closed, counting seconds. "Now climb, Captain. Full power, 20 degrees, bearing 300. The captain pulled back. The engines roared to maximum thrust. Through the window, passengers on the right side of the aircraft saw it. A small plane, flying dark with no lights, passed directly through the space where they'd been 30 seconds ago. The cabin erupted in chaos again, but this time it was relief, shock, confusion. Laura grabbed her son tight, staring at Elena with wide eyes. The F-22 pilot's voice came over the radio, awed. "Valkyrie, that was a perfect intercept avoidance. You just saved 300 lives." Elena finally sat down, her hands shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "Ghost 1, the skill doesn't disappear just because they erase your name." The lead F-22 pilot's voice cracked. "Ma'am, we owe you an apology. The whole squadron does. We should have looked harder. We should have questioned the official story." "You couldn't have known," Elena said quietly. "We should have known," the pilot insisted. "You taught us to question everything, to never accept the official story without proof. And when they told us you were dead, we just believed them." Another voice joined the frequency, an older male voice, heavy with authority. "Valkyrie 1, this is Major General Patterson, NATO Air Command. I was your superior officer 7 years ago. I signed the papers that erased you." Elena's jaw clenched. "I remember, sir." "I was wrong," the general said, and his voice broke. "The investigation was rushed. The evidence was circumstantial. I should have fought harder for you. I'm sorry." In the cabin, the passengers were silent now, listening to every word over the speakers. The American businessman slowly stood up and walked to row 14. "Ma'am, I said terrible things about you. I was wrong. I'm sorry." One by one, other passengers approached, apologizing, thanking her. Elena accepted their words with simple nods, her face unreadable. But when Laura's son came up and hugged her leg, whispering, "Thank you for saving us," Elena's eyes finally filled with tears. The general's voice came back over the radio. "Valkyrie 1, you are hereby reinstated with full honors. Your record is cleared. Welcome back, Commander." Elena shook her head, even though he couldn't see her. "Respectfully, sir, I don't want to come back. I just wanted the truth, the authentication codes and the emergency descent that saved the flight." The commercial flight landed safely at JFK International Airport in New York 3 hours later. When the cabin doors opened, something extraordinary happened. No one rushed to get off. Instead, passengers stood and applauded as Elena gathered her small backpack. They parted to create a clear path down the aisle, some with tears in their eyes, others saluting awkwardly despite having no military background. The American businessman who'd insulted her stood at his seat and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. My name is Richard Chen. I'm a venture capitalist from San Francisco. And today I learned that I'm an idiot who judges people by their silence instead of their character. He pulled out his phone and began typing. I'm posting this story everywhere. The world needs to know what real strength looks like. Elena walked past him without comment, but she nodded slightly in acknowledgement. At the gate, airport security was waiting, but instead of arresting her, they stood at attention. A decorated Air Force colonel stepped forward. Commander Volkova, I served under you in Iraq in 2016. You saved my squadron when we were outnumbered 4-1. I never got to thank you. He saluted. Elena returned it crisply. Within hours, the story exploded across news networks and social media. Woman accused of being traitor actually saved entire flight. The quiet girl in 14A was a legendary military commander. Valkyrie 1, the pilot they couldn't erase. The metal ID card became an iconic image, shared millions of times. The F-22 pilots who'd authenticated her identity released a joint statement. Valkyrie 1 was the finest commander we ever served under. She taught us that real leadership means taking responsibility even when you get no credit. Today, she proved that lesson one more time. Military aviation forums lit up with stories from people who'd served with or under Elena. Story after story of her brilliance, her calm under pressure, her refusal to leave anyone behind. One pilot wrote, I was shot down over hostile territory. My squadron wanted to abort the rescue because it was too dangerous. Valkyrie 1 said, we don't leave our people behind. And she flew the rescue herself. She took enemy fire so I could go home to my family. And then the Pentagon erased her like she never existed. Children in military academies began studying her tactical decisions. Her quote became a motto. You called me back. Now, face the truth. Major General Patterson held a press conference, his voice heavy with regret. 7 years ago, we failed, Commander Volkova. We took the easy path instead of the right path. We chose bureaucratic convenience over justice. Today, I'm announcing a full investigation into how this travesty occurred and ensuring it never happens again. The investigation revealed what Elena had known all along. The real leak had come from a senior intelligence officer who'd been selling secrets for years. He'd framed Elena because she'd been asking too many questions about his activities. That officer was arrested within 48 hours. But the most profound changes happened in quieter ways. Laura, the German mother from the flight, posted a video that went viral. My son asked me what a hero looks like. I showed him a picture of a quiet woman in seat 14A who tied his shoes and saved his life in the same day. That's what real heroes look like. They don't announce themselves. They just do what needs to be done. Richard Chen, the businessman, quit his job and started a foundation to support military members who'd been unjustly discharged. I spent my whole life judging people by their status and their volume. Elena Volkova taught me that the most powerful people are often the quietest. Flight attendants began sharing the story in their safety briefings as a reminder that you never know who's sitting in your cabin. The phrase, Seat 14A, became shorthand for unexpected heroism. Parents told their children, don't judge people by their silence. Some of the strongest people say the least. Teachers used Elena's story in lessons about resilience and integrity. The military revised their whistleblower and investigation procedures, implementing new safeguards to prevent another commander from being erased without proper evidence. Elena's old squadron adopted a new tradition. On every mission briefing, they ended with the same phrase. Remember Valkyrie. Question everything. Trust the truth. And somewhere in all that noise, in all that attention and vindication and change, the woman at the center of it all quietly slipped away. Elena Volkova didn't attend the press conferences, didn't give interviews, didn't accept the medals they wanted to give her. She did what she'd always done. She disappeared into the crowd. Because for Elena, it had never been about the recognition. It had been about proving that they couldn't erase the truth. And now, the truth was out. The viral spread of her story, and the systematic changes it triggered. Elena Volkova walked out of JFK Airport through a side exit, avoiding the cameras and reporters camped at the main terminals. She wore the same gray jacket, same faded jeans, same worn sneakers, just another face in the New York crowd. No one recognized her without the context of Seat 14A and the dramatic radio conversation. She caught a subway to Brooklyn, checked into a modest hotel under her German identity, and sat by the window looking out at the city lights. Her phone had been ringing constantly. News networks, military officials, book publishers, movie producers. She turned it off. On the hotel desk, she placed the scratched metal card. Valkyrie 1. The identity that had defined her, destroyed her, and ultimately vindicated her. She ran her thumb over the engraved letters one last time. Then she took a lighter from her pocket and held the flame to the corner of her notebook, the one filled with 7 years of bitter memories, surveillance notes, evidence she'd collected trying to prove her innocence. She watched it burn in the hotel sink, the pages curling and blackening. Some battles you win by fighting. Some you win by surviving long enough for the truth to emerge. She'd done both. The next morning, Elena was gone. The hotel staff found the room empty except for one thing left on the desk: the metal ID card. Valkyrie 1. A note beside it read simply, "For the museum," so they remember not to erase people so easily next time. Within a month, the card was installed in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, in a special exhibit about integrity and military justice. The placard beneath it read, "She was the quiet girl in Seat 14A, Commander Elena Volkova, call sign Valkyrie 1. A reminder that silence is not weakness, and absence of recognition is not absence of worth." One of Elena's former pilots, now a colonel, wrote a memoir about serving under her. The book became a bestseller, but the final chapter was the most powerful. The greatest revenge isn't shouting at those who wronged you. It's saving their lives anyway. Commander Volkova didn't just prove she was innocent. She proved she was better than all of us. She had every reason to let that flight crash, to let karma handle the businessman who mocked her and the system that destroyed her. Instead, she saved them all. That's not revenge. That's grace. Military academies began using the Valkyrie principle in ethics classes. When you have power, when you have knowledge, when you have the ability to save or destroy, what do you choose? Do you use your power for vindication or for good? Elena had chosen good, even after everything they'd taken from her. 5 years later, a young female cadet was sitting in Seat 14A on a flight to her first assignment. She'd chosen that seat deliberately. As a tribute, she pulled out a new metal ID card from her pocket, fresh from the academy, her own call sign engraved on it. She thought about Commander Volkova, who'd proven that they couldn't erase people who refused to be erased. That truth outlasts lies. That skill outlasts rank. That character outlasts reputation. The flight attendant stopped by her seat. "Heading to your first posting?" The young cadet nodded, clutching her ID card. "Nervous?" the attendant asked kindly. "No, ma'am. the cadet replied, her voice steady. Someone taught me that real strength doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs to be ready when called. The flight attendant smiled. Sounds like someone wise. She was. She is. The cadet looked out the window as the plane taxied. I never met her, but she changed my life anyway. All over the world, in dozens of countries, in hundreds of cockpits and command centers, people who'd never met Elena Volkova carried her lesson with them. That power isn't about rank or recognition. It's about what you do when no one's watching, when you have nothing to gain, when helping others only risks yourself. That's when you discover who you really are. Elena had discovered she was still Valkyrie 1, even without the uniform, without the squadron, without her name in any official record. Some identities run deeper than paperwork, and somewhere in the world, in a quiet apartment, in an unknown city, a woman with gray eyes and long black hair was living proof. You can erase someone's name. You can erase their record. You can erase their rank and their medals and their place in history. But you can't erase what they are. And Elena Volkova was, and always would be, someone who saved lives. Even the lives of people who didn't deserve it. Especially those lives. Because that's what heroes do. The ID card in the Smithsonian, label reading, she was the quiet girl in seat 14A. If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to SN Quiet Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Thank you for listening.